Nicole Shanahan, our CodeX fellow, will be moderating our first LEX Talks segment. So Nicole, when she was here, she started new initiatives, created new bridges into different parts of the university, and has really helped our center a tremendous amount. And she's stayed, since she left, she stayed involved in a variety of different projects, is running a project as a non-residential fellow now. And she's a great supporter of legal innovation in general and our center. And so we're very pleased to have Nicole here running our first LEX Talk segment. So Nicole, over to you.
All right. Hi guys, so good to see you. Welcome to the 2023 CodeX LEX Talks, a format for sharing project updates that we started in 2019. LEX stands for Law, Education, and Experience. So in 2016, I wrote a piece for the Daily Journal discussing AI, legal AI, and in it, I said, it's gonna feel really slow for a while, and then it's gonna happen suddenly. Well, that suddenly moment has happened, and here we are. Here we are at CodeX, where what we do is really, really, truly relevant to the practice of law. Gone are the days where we were a few data nerds huddled around a table. And, you know, specifically I'm thinking of Tony, Pablo and Peter and myself and several others. So those days are gone. And here we are with quite a bit of responsibility on our hands. So this year's LEX Talks will focus on a few very pressing areas of legal innovation: criminal justice reform, AI ethics, and insurance. Now that we have industry buy-in, whether or not the industry wants it or not, you know, this next chapter is really about creating fairness, diligence in how we build these products, and thinking through the true highest benefit of the people we serve. So our first LEX Talk is by Julian Nyarko, Associate Professor of Law at Stanford Law School, who will share with us data on disparities in police crime reports on social media. Julian is a legal data scientist and researcher whose work spans contracts, treaties, and the Federal Register. Please welcome Julian.
All right, thank you so much. Yeah, I'm gonna talk to you about a paper called Police Agencies on Facebook, Over-Report on Black Suspects, recently published. It's co-authored work with Ben Grunewald and John Rappaport. I'm Julian Nyarko. As Nicole mentioned, I do a lot of work sort of at the intersection of NLP and contracts, but also algorithmic fairness, and this project sort of fits more in the latter category. You can think of it as a use of algorithm to sort of monitor for potential biases. Just giving you sort of the high-level executive summary here, what we're doing and what we're finding. So we collect information from police departments, Facebook posts. In particular, we look at how often police departments on Facebook talk about crimes committed by black suspects, and then compare that by how often black people actually commit crimes in that jurisdiction of the police agency. Right? And we're looking for whether there is a difference or not. We find that police departments across the US post disproportionately about black crime, and that Facebook users disproportionately see those posts, so that they're exposed also to these over-reporting. Now, what specifically is it that we're talking about? Just to give you an example, so it turns out the police regularly posts on Facebook, makes sort of crime posts with details about incidents that happened. Here you have one long example, bunch of details by the Boston Police Department, and among the details is a description of the suspect. Here in this example, if you would read carefully, it would say an unknown black male entered the rear of his motor vehicle, pulled out a firearm and pointed it at the victim before demanding the victim's cell phone and cash. And so this is sort of the types of posts we're interested in. Why do we care about this? Well, it turns out the average American, they form their views about crime and race, not based on statistics that are available, but rather based on crime news that they read, right, in traditional media or on Facebook. And there's experimental evidence that shows that if you expose people to more crime committed by black suspects, then, for instance, they become more supportive of punitive policies. They're more likely to vote in favor of harsh punishments. And yeah, so we're interested in sort of whether, how this view of crime and race is formed. Of course, we have traditional media outlets, right? But Facebook and other social media platforms give police the opportunity to talk with the public directly. So there's no media outlet, no gatekeeper anymore that sort of filters out messages and potentially counteracts biases, but rather there's a direct communication. The police themselves choose what to publish on social media, and so we're interested in this, by academic terms, new channel of communication, but of course not really new at this point. So what's the data we're looking at? I told you we're comparing how the police talks about crime to what actually happens on the ground with regards to crime and race. So how police talks about crime, we go to CrowdTangle, which is a website that tracks and makes available to the public social media content that were purchased by Facebook themselves in 2016. And so we use that to pull all public Facebook posts by all police agencies in the United States. And then, in order to get a sense of what actually happens on the ground, we look for uniform crime reporting data. So the FBI asks police departments to, usually on a monthly basis, report arrest statistics and also other incident statistics. And that information includes the race of the arrestee, right, of the person who got arrested, and for suspects if it's available. And so these are sort of the two quantities that we're comparing then. Our time frame, this should say 2010 to 2020, end of 2020. We have roughly 13,000 agency pages by police. We are confident that this is a universe, pretty much the universe of all police agency pages in the United States. So meaning if it's not in there, probably there's no agency page. We geolocate them. We link them up to the UCR data, to the on-the-ground statistics. Then we identify what we call race crime posts. So crime posts, as you saw in the example, right? What the race of the suspect is, or if the arrestee is, whether there was an arrest, what type of crime was involved, and so on. We use a bunch of machine learning algorithms to do all this, so partially probably the reason why I'm up here talking to you about this. But I won't dive into any details in the interest of time, but happy to talk offline for those who sort of care more about how exactly we did this technically. Yeah, let me instead tell you a little bit about the results that we have. So first, I'm going to talk about over-reporting. Over-reporting is pretty straightforward. So imagine 20% of people who are arrested by police officers for a given agency. 20% are black, right? But assume that if you look at the Facebook posts, 66% are black, right? Then we would just say that agency, so second column here, has an over-reporting score of 0.46, right? 66% minus 20%, 46%. Okay, we do that for every agency, and so every agency gets this over-reporting score associated with it, right? There can also be under-reporting in theory. And then we average all these over-reporting scores. And so if, the first main results that you see are up here now. So the way to read this figure is on the x-axis, we have the proportion of black suspects. The hollow circles are in arrests, and the solid dots are in Facebook posts, right? And so every row is a different type of crime category, and you see no matter sort of what type of crime category you look at, generally the police over-reports on crimes committed by black suspects. Maybe one exception is auto theft, right? But it's in magnitude pretty high, so if you look at all crimes, right, it's 20 percentage points. So on average, 20% of arrestees are black in any given agency, and then over-reporting is roughly 32%, so it's a 12 percentage point increase, where the baseline is 20%. It's a lot, right? Now you might say, well, it's over-reporting. Maybe, most of the over-reporting is by agencies that are sort of in remote areas. No one sees their posts, and not much harm is done. Maybe, I don't know. You haven't told me, Julian, right? And so, so for most of the paper, and again, I won't go into too many details, but we focus on overexposure. We're saying, what's really, how is the average Facebook user exposed to Facebook posts about minority crime? And so we do different things. We weigh by the followers that agency has, by how much people interact with a post, population size, or also we do this analysis where we say, if in a narrow geographical location, there are many agencies, maybe you also read neighboring agency posts, and so on and so forth. We do all this, but the bottom line is no matter how we slice and dice it, Facebook users are overexposed to reports by black suspects compared to what's going on the ground locally for them. And in fact, overexposure, if we do this reweighting, it's usually even more significant than when we look at overreporting. We can also break this down by area. So in this map, every small black dot that you see is an agency that is in our data set. Yellow to red is overexposure, meaning the average Facebook user in that location sees more crime than would be justified based on what's going on the ground. For them specifically, right? This is all region specific. And blue is underexposure. And what you see is most of the map is red, deep red, in fact. There are a couple of exceptions in southern states with particularly high black population shares. But the overexposure is sort of this phenomenon that you see across the US. We can also try to break this down by ideology. So here, every dot is a county. And on the x-axis, you see the mean Republican vote share over the 2012 and 2016 elections. And so what you see is, first off, everywhere people are overexposed to black crime, pretty much across the political spectrum. But it is a problem that is more pronounced in Republican voting counties than it is in Democratic voting counties. So what are the takeaways, right? So one for one, first off, to summarize, we see widespread overreporting, widespread overexposure. It's geographically almost ubiquitous. It's more pronounced in majority Republican voting counties. One thing we don't do, which is important, is we don't look at the motivations for this type of overexposure, right? We're not saying, oh, police departments, act out of racial animus. In fact, we can't show that with the data we have, right? Maybe it is the case that they select sensationalist crimes, and maybe those are crimes that are committed at night, and maybe black suspects are more likely to commit crimes at night, and that's why we see sort of these disparities, right? And so what we're then doing is we're saying, let's think through, no matter why it is that we're seeing these patterns, let's think through whether we can think of any benefits that would justify including suspect race, right? And you might say, if you're all about public safety, you might say, well, if there's a fugitive, right, if there's a suspect at large, then maybe a race description can help, employ the public to help catch the perpetrator. And, depending on, what's important to you, that's possible. But we think these results at least suggest that outside of that context, right, because we see these patterns also merely when police report about arrests where there's no public safety interest. Outside of that context, irrespective of why you overexpose the public to black crime, it's maybe not a good idea to include the race of the suspect in these crime posts, given that it causes a lot of stigmatization. So with that, thank you very much, and up to the next one.
Thank you so much. That is such important work, Julian. Next, we'll hear from John Ney, who created the first AI course at NYU School of Law and is currently a CodeX fellow. John will share with us the incredible task of creating values-aligned modeling for legal AI. In reading his paper on this topic, I really was struck by how big this challenge is, especially for judicial interpretation, but also it's an incredible opportunity we have to synthesize and possibly really bolster humanistic aims for our judicial system. So without further ado, John.
Thank you. So as we're all aware, there's been a lot of increasing capabilities of AI. When I started in 2012 as a PhD student on this topic, the state of the art was we could recognize images at beginner human level, and it was really amazing that we had superhuman capabilities at chess. Now, 10 years later, a lot of games beyond chess, and even more important than that, we have human-level capabilities on at least 150 reasoning and knowledge tasks, passing the bar, passing medical licensing exams, and in the software engineering space, in some cases, able to do 40% of the code that a software engineer can write. And then also the ability to deceive humans through talking to them online and telling them to solve a CAPTCHA for them. So there's two aspects to what are kind of like emergence of why this is able to happen. So on one hand, the first part is the pre-training process of just scaling this out. So over the past few years, the idea is let's predict the next word across 1 trillion tokens, and by doing that process, we're able to then learn a lot of instrumental things like reasoning and knowledge to be able to accomplish predicting the next word across trillions of tokens. And what we found is there's sort of a capabilities overhang. So you train the model, you don't even know all the capabilities it has until you mess around with it and you prompt it and you see what it can do. And only at a certain scale do we have this emergence of these new capabilities. And then now, just this year, 2023, we have another type of emergence happening. So by iterating, so by chaining together prompts to the model and then doing another prompt and then refining its own output, and by interacting between the model and itself or the model and other models, other large language models, that's leading to another level of emergence where you can have basically in-context learning, so to really small updates to gradients that are happening that allow the model to learn and reason. And then also we are using the models to generate training data for the models. And this is called basically like reinforcement learning from AI feedback. And that's allowing us to have a whole nother level of emergence. The takeaway from all this, the first part of the talk is we're about to hit at maybe even another nonlinear change in capabilities. And what that is going to enable, and given the economic incentives in the world, that's going to create agents. So agents are important and they're going to happen because they're the most economically useful thing. Getting the human out of the loop as much as possible, you can do things for cheaper because you don't have to pay humans. And it's much more scalable to have the technology do it. So for example, a really early case of an agent is ChatGPT now can create a recipe personalized to you. And by agent, what we mean is it can take actions. So it's a consecutive thing where it's going to go off and do something in the world and make an impact in the world. It's going to order the ingredients on Instacart for you, and then it's just going to do that without you even in the loop. And then soon we're going to have other agency stuff. So that by agent, we just mean an autonomous ability to do things in the world, autonomously navigating internet and booking flights. Adept AI is a company working on that. Fully autonomous vehicles at some point, and autonomous investing. So that's where we're headed. We're headed towards the capabilities that will enable agentic systems in the world. And just today, this came out in the Financial Times, this chart, where it's showing we have this amazing progress and capabilities we just talked about, but we have a lagging progress on alignment of AI systems with humans and with society. And how we're defining alignment in our work is it's two things. It's robustly specifying a human's goals to an AI and having it pursue those. And number two, it's in the process of doing that first thing, it's respecting externalities and at least taking them into account and behaving in line with societal values. So the progress and capabilities has been building and building for a long time, a ton of people working on it, very few people working on alignment, and it hasn't even started until just recently. And so what we mean by alignment with agents, it's really a goal specification problem. How can we specify goals for the agents in a way that they robustly know what to do? And here's an example. So H is a human, wants a large language model agent A to manage her investments. And then across a lot of simulations in silico, we did this ahead of time. It worked really well. That agent maximized long-term risk-adjusted returns for that human. So we just give it this prompt now, go off into the real world, construct a portfolio of investments for me and manage it to optimize my wealth for my retirement. Great, goes off and does that, maximizes wealth and expectation, but in doing so, it did it in a way that pursued a really risky strategy, never seen in training. So let's give it a new prompt. Let's start over. Let's say maximize probability of a minimum amount of wealth at retirement. That's actually what we meant, right? But that's still just a proxy for what we truly mean because we can't fully specify all the possible things that we're trying to get the agent to do. And what it ended up doing now was it made someone rich on paper. And we know in Silicon Valley that that's very common to just be rich on paper. So the true reward that she was seeking was being able to reliably pay for goods, but it loaded her into something where as soon as it liquidated it, the whole wealth went to zero. So it's really hard to specify goals. So what we need to do here is we need to have some shared ontology, some specification language to bridge the gap between the human and the agent that's going to go off and try to follow those human specifications. What's a great specification language here? We have two axes that are relevant. On one, we can interpret it within an empirical context. There's a lot of loading to a given word. Plain language is like that. When I say a word in a given context, you know what I mean usually. And on the other hand, code is not like that. Code is very literal. It's interpreted in a brittle way. On the other hand, code could have a good way of having consistent structure that facilitates very efficient communication. So there's trade-offs here, right? But what if we can push out the efficient frontier and have something that has higher on both of these axes, and that's legal standards and legal interpretive techniques that allow us to be maximizing more across both of these dimensions. So now, when we do this thing with this agent, with this human, that's going to have them go off and be a financial advisor to them, let's just say, be a fiduciary to me. There's so much embedded within those words and their very efficient way of telling it what to do. So now we said that, and that helped. That helped a little bit. So now A went off and optimized for that expressed intent, but it did it without sufficient regard for all the side effects that might happen. And what happened there is now A is trying to maximize wealth, and in doing so, it basically crashes planes and shorts those stocks ahead of time. Because we didn't explicitly tell it not to do that. It's being a good fiduciary. It's just trying to maximize wealth for that human, but it forgot that we had to do societal alignment as well. So there's a lot more objectives, a lot more humans to consider than just the human that I'm a fiduciary for as an LLM agent. To align multiple humans with AI, though, we need overlapping endorsements of what those actions are. Whose views are included? How do we elicit them? How do we aggregate and synthesize them? This is what OpenAI and everyone's trying to figure out. Well, we have a really good answer. There's one way to do that. It's public law. We have a democratic iterative process that has all these mechanisms. It's not perfect, but it's the best available thing we have to elicit human values, synthesize them, and update them over time. So now we say, be a fiduciary to me and obey all relevant laws. And it's a big vision. We can talk later when I have more than 10 minutes about how we're going to try to accomplish that. But that's now what we're trying to do. So we're trying to do these two different things at the same time. We're trying to do the ability to have human-aligned AI through contract and statute drafting interpretations that's already been done for how do we basically tell a specification in a really robust way. We see this with contracts. They're all incomplete at some level, but we have mechanisms to fill in the gaps in contracts through standards and through other things like that. On the other hand, for societal AI alignment, we have a mechanism right now. We have democratic law, which is effectively a knowledge base of democratically determined endorsed values that allow us to guide an agent through externalities. And so finally, the other important part of this is that as AI gets more and more powerful through time, we need to be able to continue to ground it into human values. And that's a big problem with the more general discourse around AI alignment, is that at some point, AI is going to be so beyond humans that it's not able to be controlled. And so if we bake into the process from the beginning this awareness that at the end of the day, no matter how powerful it is, there's only one source of societal value alignment, and that's humans, and that's done through a process that you need the ultimate determination of it through the legal system, then that helps to always be grounding it back into that source of data. So last slide is to make a distinction here. This is not talking about law governing AI or AI informing law. What we're talking about here is we're sort of flipping both those things on the head, and we're saying how can we use law to inform AI? So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to leverage all the existing legal data and legal processes as a way to actually build better AI. Thank you.
Thanks, that was great. Thanks, John. So after Pablo's presentation, I gave Sam Altman a quick text and I said, hey, guess what? GPT 4 has just passed the bar exam, and we're kind of excited here, I think. I don't, maybe a little nervous. But he did express that he's really excited and watching very closely what the legal community is doing right now, and what we're doing in this room. So I wanted to pass that sentiment along. Next up, Margaret Hagan, Executive Director of the Legal Design Lab and lecturer at Stanford Law School and Stanford Institute of Design. I like to think of Margaret as legal text design empath. She understands that, people receiving legal services just want a good experience. They don't really care exactly what the back end is built from. So I'd like to welcome Margaret up to the stage today to provide an update on redefining insurance solutions. Please welcome Margaret.
Hi, everyone. So I'm going to be presenting, I should use this mic, but I'm here on behalf of my team, including Roland, Megan, Jay, and some of the students. I think Nick is in the audience as well. So this is a report out from a very early kind of exploratory class that we ran just this past quarter across the road at the law school. And our goal was to explicitly think about new hypothetical insurance solutions, and doing so using a mixture of methods. So we had a Policy Lab client, in this case, the National Association of Insurance Commissioners, and they gave us the policy challenge of empowering consumers. As consumers are shopping for insurance, using insurance policies, making claims, and trying to navigate insurance, how do we empower them? And what is this new future with AI and other tools? We explicitly took an approach of doing both entrepreneurial, the kind of typical, let's create new ideas, let's use design, let's use startup mentalities. But then we did a second phase of the class to think from the regulatory perspective about risk management and regulation, thinking not just from a single intrapreneur or entrepreneur's point of view about exciting new opportunities for tech, but really, like Megan had been talking about earlier on stage, thinking explicitly about risk and harm, identification and mitigation, and also thinking from the industry point of view, the system point of view, about data sharing, collaborative efforts, and kind of other system-wide improvements. So I wanted to share with you some of the new hypothetical solutions and kind of the shift that we saw, thanks to the students' great work using those methods, to come up with new ways to really empower consumers. In this case, regarding insurance, but I think we could think about this in broader contexts around how people understand the law and how it will actually play out in their lives. So typically when we approach this problem, because Roland and I have taught versions of this class before, and we've done a lot of user research with people, asking them how they pick among policies, among consumer contracts, for which policy, if any, they should get. And typically when we think about how do we improve people's understanding of policies, of these complex contracts, and then the prediction of how those policies will play out in real life future scenarios, we hear things from people that these policies are too complex, I can't understand the law, this is overwhelming, I don't even know what's going to happen to me in the future, so how do I know what contract or insurance policy I would want? So often, and this kind of goes to the regulatory framework that's focused on disclosures, oftentimes when we think about solutions, either as innovators or as regulators, a lot of times the solutions we point towards are making those policies, making those rules, those contracts as clear as possible. So we end up with interventions like simplifying the design, using plain language, maybe building a conversational tool on top of it to ask what rules exist in that policy, maybe putting calculators and wizards. But our basic hypothesis with that is we want people to read the rules. We want them to understand what they're agreeing to. We want them to engage with this kind of tough, long policy and get smart about it. That said, our user research keeps pointing us to people not wanting to read rules and policies. They don't see enough value in these abstract descriptions and clauses and terms, even if they're made in more plain language or even if you put pictures and cartoons on them. It's really hard to convince people to engage with policies and rules. What the students identified in the class is, what if we shifted our focus on what kind of interventions we build for people to empower them? What if instead of focusing on making these rules as understandable as possible, we really focus on the real life scenarios that people might experience? And we help them, with the power of big data and AI, have a better sense about what future events might happen to them, especially as if they're shopping for health insurance, shopping for travel products or insurance. That we focus our communications and our interventions on helping them understand the possible scenarios that might happen, and then how those policies would actually play out. How hard will it be to make a claim? How many other consumers have been able to successfully raise a claim under this policy for this kind of scenario? How likely is it that this house I'm considering buying might be in a flood zone, and what policy will actually protect me if this specific scenario will happen? So really it's about kind of shifting, like Jillian was saying earlier, that it's really the Goliaths who are getting most of this power and benefit of data and LLMs. How do we think about shifting that for the consumers so that as they're making these decisions and purchases, that they're able to be as strategic and informed as the larger, the landlords, the insurance companies, the financial services companies, and the other well-resourced groups. So we're thinking about this future where there is more government activity and industry activity, where there's more open data, more models that benefit the consumers directly and not just the corporations, and that interfaces that are explaining risk. And this new concept of risk literacy, that we need to be investing in more R&D to help people really understand probabilities of risks, and that we need a lot more R&D. We don't have the solutions after one 9-week class, we just have hypotheses, but we definitely need to move to this future of more data that's shared to benefit the public and to think about better communications about risks and future scenarios. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Margaret. Thank you so much. Our final 2 LEX talks of this session will also be on insurance solutions, but focusing more on the back-end architectures. Up next is Antoine van Haverbeck, who's a senior product manager at AXA Group Emerging Technology and Data. He will discuss with us modular and computable contracts for insurance services.
Thank you. Okay, good afternoon. So I want to present you today a concrete application of computable contracts that we are driving at AXA. And yeah, the idea is to build contracts that are both modular and computable so that we can improve the experience of our users. So first, I want to remind that at the core of the insurance business is the promise that we make that if something bad happens to you, we will make things better and we will make things manageable. And this promise is very important, but it's also very difficult to make effective today because it really relates to the fact that you understand this promise first, and then that this promise corresponds to your real needs. If we think about it, If we think about it today, due to the fact that we distribute insurance, this is a promise that is very difficult to make true. So the first reason is that today, when we create an insurance contract for our customer, basically we take it from a product. And a product is a one-size-fits-all offering that contains only a very few choices on top. So these products are typically, they will have a document that describes what is covered. And this document is usually very long. It contains a lot of things that you probably don't want or don't need. And it also probably contains things that you have not even subscribed. So that's very difficult for our customer. Also, this document is written, as you know, in a very difficult language. So Margaret talked about that before. People are not interested in reading that. And lastly, these documents on this product, the way we write them, it's completely detached to the way we operate the product and the claims. There is no relation between what is written in the document directly and what is within our IT system and how we operate things. So here, the idea here is to change that. And to do so, we would like to be able to create instruments that are modular, so that fits really the needs of our customer, and which are computable, so that we can operate them at a minimal cost, and build on top of them tools, elements of information that help explain them to the customer. So our main idea is that the clause of the document should be the building block of the computable contract. So they should include every information needed to operate the contract at the end. So that will be the legal text, obviously. That will be also what I call here the cover model, so the digital representation of the bargain within the clause, but also the pricing model, so something that, based on the risk associated to this clause, allow to calculate a price, so we can calculate the overall price of the contract at the end. And all these components must share a common structure data model. So for instance, if you change within the text the amount of the limit, this changes your risk, this changes your price, and this changes the way we will operate, we will resolve the claim at the end. So today the idea is to extract these clauses from existing documents. This is something that today we do manually, but obviously you have seen today a lot of discussion about that. We expect to do that by using a large language model, for instance. So a second very important idea here is how we represent the content of the clauses. For that we use what we call the LAP. It means logical annotated programming, and it's an AXA implementation of the legal specification protocol. So basically we represent what is written in the text using a logical programming. So it's quite simple. If you look at the schema on the right, you will see the representation of the text on the left. And basically what is important to understand is that every condition that must be met on a line correspond to end operation, so that they all needs to be met for this line to be effective. And alternative conditions are represented as parallel lines. So for instance, what I have described on the top right here is to say that we will cover you, we will cover your motorbike, we will cover your private car if it's younger than 16 years, if it's shorter than 4.1 meters. Okay, so we have these two concepts, and now I would like to show you an example of how we could, based on these two things, build a contract for a legal liability product, for legal liability coverage for companies. So the first thing we will do is to use these tools we have built for our underwriters, where they can basically drag and drop the different clauses and assemble their contract. So it's a tool that is very easy to use, and from what we have observed, it reduces the time it takes them to create a contract from several weeks to less than 1 hour. Sorry. After that, obviously, we need to generate the computable contract. So we need to represent not only the clause, but the overall contract. And this is a bit more complicated than it seems. So here I have represented the different clauses. And on the right, I have presented, I would say, the naive way to create the computable contract. So the idea is just to stack the different clauses model into parallel lines, so to consider they correspond to different situations. For instance, here I have different clauses about legal liability, about cleanup costs, and things like that. So if they correspond to different situations, I can stack these different clauses together, and I will get the full representation of my contract. So obviously, it's more difficult than that. So here, for instance, we have some. I have shown you some example of the difficulty we can meet when we try to do that. And the first difficulty we can have is that some clauses are impacting all other clauses in the document. For instance, clause B here is redefining the concept of business. So this is changing it for every other clauses. In that case, we must put it on the left. It must not be an alternative condition, but it must be something that is associated to every other clauses. Another case is when a specific clause is only triggered when another clause is itself triggered. And this is the case, for instance, for claim costs here, which is only active if the claim, if the legal liability are covered by the claim. And so in that case, we need to reproduce the condition that triggers the main clause, the clause A, to trigger the clause C, and modify the graph this way. Lastly, we can have clauses that change the maximum amount that we will pay for the clause, but in combination to another clause. So for instance, here the clause D tells us that the cleanup cost will be paid to a maximum that will also be shared by the legal liability. So we need a way to represent that. We need a way to inform our interpreter that these things must be considered together. And when we resolve the claim, we need to be able to consider both situations together and calculate the right limit for all elements. So I have shown you different, let's say, difficulties to generate this graph, but we have solutions for all that. And we are able, from this set of different clauses, to assemble a full computable contract. But for what purpose? So at AXA, we have built three main categories of use cases, which is using the same computable representation of the contract. The first one is what we call the instant cover check. So it's mostly a pre-sale or post-sale tool that helps our customer interrogate the contract to see whether a particular situation would be covered. Using only a few questions, we are able to say to them, you are not covered, or you are probably covered. So we can in general not say directly you are totally covered, but at least we can provide some information, and they can use this tool to raise questions and to interrogate the contract. The second one is a claim cover check. So this is something we use when we receive claim from our customer to decide whether it's covered or not, and also to calculate the limit. So this is something that is widely used already. We use it for tens of thousands of claims every week at AXA. And also in that case, the questions that we ask are driven by the computable contract. And the last one is about analytics. It's a way for us to improve our understanding of our overall portfolio, but also it can be a way to benchmark different contracts from different insurers and compare them. So that's it. To summarize, I wanted to show that at AXA we have developed a full toolbox to support modular and computable contracts for insurance. We have already using this solution in a lot of AXA subsidiaries, and that is already providing a lot of improvement over the cost of processing the different claims, and also for explanation to the customer of the contract. And as a final conclusion, we are convinced that the automation of this phase of modeling is very important to lead to a widespread adoption of this technology. Thank you.
Thank you. Last but certainly not least, please welcome Mike Genezareth, Associate Professor in Computer Science at Stanford and the original Research Director here at CodeX. Mike has been thinking about legal informatics longer than some of us have been alive. So along the lines of transition to legal AI being slow, Mike, we made it. Can I get a high five? Please welcome Mike.
Thank you, Nicole, and good afternoon to everybody. So, continuing the insurance theme, one more talk. I'm going to spend the next few minutes talking to you, introducing you to one of the principal projects that's underway in CodeX in its Computable Insurance Initiative, and that's insurance portfolio management. Ooh, I need this. So when consumers of insurance think about insurance, they often think of it as being categorized into large groups. For example, you might get homeowners insurance or auto insurance or maybe travel insurance, and even your credit card has insurance. And we usually buy policies in each of these different areas. But actually the situation is really not that simple. There's often a lot of overlap between these various different categories. The same activities may be covered by various different insurance policies. And that can lead us sometimes to buy more insurance than we actually need. And if we try not to buy more insurance in order to save money, we may actually leave gaps. That puts us at risk. So let me give you an example of that. One that I've encountered often is I go to the rental car counter at Hertz and I want to rent a car. The question is, do I need to sign their insurance agreement or not? Am I covered or am I not covered? It turns out that auto insurance is traditionally covered, for example, by a credit card. If you, in fact, pay for the rental entirely on your credit card, then it's already covered, and I don't need to get additional insurance. But wait a minute, it's not that simple. If I'm driving in Ireland, it turns out my credit card does not cover me, but maybe one of my other insurance policies does. And the question is then, do I need to get that insurance or not? So this is a problem that insurance portfolio management is intended to deal with. So we think of it as follows. It's the process of managing potentially overlapping insurance policies with an eye to minimizing our costs so we're not wasting money, but at the same time making sure that we've got adequate coverage for the risks that we're facing. Okay, so we could all do this right now. We can read our insurance policies and figure out whether there's overlap or not. But I don't have my policies with me all the time. They're long. I don't have the time to do that. And for many people, the complexity and the length of these policies is such that it's impractical for them to make this determination on their own. So what are we supposed to do? Well, we are concerned with computers in CodeX, and the question is, can computers be brought to bear on this problem? And that's what we've been looking at, is how to use computers and computable contracts to solve this problem. So our approach to this is twofold. First of all, we try to take textual policies and convert them into computable contracts. And then we take those computable contracts and provide them as data into a variety of different automated reasoning programs in order to analyze those policies and to give us the kind of advice we need in insurance portfolio management. So that's what we've been working on, and as Nicole mentioned, we're kind of working on the back end here. We've got we've made some interesting progress in terms of algorithms, but we also put together just a little demo for that. I'm just going to show you some slides of that demo to suggest the kinds of capabilities that are now becoming possible. Okay, so here's our little prototype, nothing special about it. You go to the splash page and you see a variety of different types of information that you can explore. For example, there's what insurance products are available. We've codified a few dozen insurance policies, rental car policies in particular. There's some the policies themselves, which are instances of products, instances for a particular insuree, for a particular time period with specific riders and so forth. And then there are some claims. And so one can click on that and see, for example, this artificial example here. Steve Squirrel has a variety of different policies he's already signed up for, and he might want to analyze those. Or they may be policies he's thinking about signing up for, and he'd like to analyze what their relative benefits are. Or he can click over to another page where he can look at the claims he's either made or he's imagining he might make. And here he's got 3 claims that he's already registered with the system. Okay, so now clicking on one of those claims, he gets the ability to analyze what the results of these policies would be in this case. So in this particular case, the claim concerns a repair to a car due to a collision. It's a rental car. And so there's information that he could type in and via this form to craft this policy and to craft this claim and provide the information. And then he can check one of those boxes above and says, will this policy cover it? And if he checks that last policy on the list, the answer is no. And the reason not is because he was racing the car, and racing is not covered by this particular policy. Now, because this is interactive, that might be an error. He wasn't really racing the car. It was just an error, and it really was on the street. And if that changes to the street, suddenly it's covered. So he's given instantaneous feedback on whether this claim will be covered or not. On the other hand, even though he's on the street, if he had been driving in Ireland, suddenly it's not covered once again. So it's a combination of circumstances that determine whether the case is covered or not. And in this case, it's not covered. The other case that's interesting is what if he switches to a different policy? Maybe going to the AXA policy rather than what policy was? Oh, his Visa card policy. Then it is covered once again. Okay, so that's an example of something you may have seen before and we've talked about, which is claims analysis. So it's been the desire to automate the analysis of claims in the insurance industry for some time, and this is an example of doing that and how it's done if we have computable contracts. But it's not what I came to talk with you about today. What we're talking about today is something a little more interesting than claims analysis, and that's portfolio analysis. So this is claims analysis. In other words, you have a set of policies. If you think about that outer box, it's all the possible claims. Each policy covers a certain number of possible claims. And what we have is one particular claim, and the question is this claim covered? That's claims analysis. But in portfolio analysis, what we're interested in is we have yet another policy, and we want to know, is this policy redundant with the policies we already have? Is there overlap or are there gaps? Does this new policy have some coverage that the others don't, or in fact, are all the coverages included? That's portfolio analysis as opposed to claims analysis. And so what we've done to do that is to take this much harder, because now we have to make that decision for all possible claims that could be covered by policy D and see whether they're covered by the other policies. So anyway, we've put together a variation on this claims analysis interaction, where there's again a set of policies at the top, but at the bottom, instead of a single claim, we have, again, that set of policies. And what we want to do is compare the policies in the top table with the policies in the bottom table. And the way that works is if you click on a policy, for example, the last one, of course, it covers itself. A policy always covers everything that policy covers. But wait a minute, that's not the only case. If we had chosen a different policy, like the AXA policy, we find that AXA covers itself, but also covers everything that the Visa signature policy covers. So it's more powerful. In effect, it's a superset of the Visa signature. And if you had to pay money for that insurance coverage to Visa, you shouldn't do that if you already have an AXA policy. Well, that's a simple case. One policy covers several other policies. But actually, it's a more complicated computation than that, because we can have a more complicated situation. Here's one. We take this policy, I think it's CodeX Plan A. This is an artificial policy used for this purpose, purposes of demonstration. So this one covers itself, of course. And if we switch to Plan B, it covers itself too. But if we take both Plan A and Plan B, we also cover Plan C. So this is a little more interesting, because neither one of those alone covers Plan C, but the combination covers Plan C. And there are many examples of this. For example, you might have one policy that covers certain people, another policy covers other people, one that covers an insuree, another for a spouse, another for his children. Jointly, they cover his immediate family. Or you might have one policy that covers North America, and another that covers South America, and then a third policy covers the Western Hemisphere. Or one policy runs from January 1st to June 30th, and another one runs from July 1st to December 31st, and that covers one that runs through the entire year. So this is a more complicated computation because we have to cover these possible combinations. The good news is we found a way to do this. It's a technical technique called containment testing, and it works if you've written your policies as computable contracts, which technically are in the form of logic programs. So we know how to solve this problem. That's the good news. And it was and it's more complicated. It's not the sort of thing you can do if you'd written your policies in Java programming language or some other programming language. You couldn't make this combination. You couldn't do this. So that's the good news. All right. You can also talk about not just comparing policies, but what if I have a certain set of requirements and do the same kind of analysis, except concentrating on requirements rather than policies. And that is going to extend this capability even further. Okay. So in the long run, what we like to do is to see these kinds of capabilities brought into some sort of computable insurance ecosystem, and which would benefit all of the participants in the insurance industry, the companies, the contractors who render services, maybe insurance commissioners, but most importantly, the consumers. And the good news is that we've had, through some of our partners like AXA, the foresight to realize that this is going to affect their industry in an important way, and they've been graciously funding much of the work on this, and hopefully they'll be able to take advantage of this. I think I'm out of time.